Tale of the Landlady. A 17-year-old boy named Billy Weaver went to Philadelphia to find a job. When he got off the train, carrying his suitcase, he went looking for somewhere to stay for the night. There was a line of tall houses on each side of the street, and all of them looked identical. Billy noticed a sign on one window that read, "Bed and Breakfast." He crossed the street and peered through the window. There was a fire burning in the hearth, and a little dog was curled up asleep on the carpet. He saw that the room was nicely furnished. There was a piano, a big sofa, and in the corner, there was a parrot in a cage. It looked like a nice place to stay. He rang the doorbell, and before he even had time to take his finger off the button, the door swung open, and a middle-aged woman was standing there. She gave him a little bit of a fright. "Come in, come in," she said, with a welcoming smile. Billy went inside, and she closed the door behind him. I was looking for a room for the night," he said. "It's all ready for you, my dear," she said, as she took his coat and hung it up in the hallway. $5 a night, including breakfast. It was very cheap, and the woman seemed nice and friendly. She reminded him of his own mother. "We have the place to ourselves," she said, as she led the way upstairs. "It isn't very often I have visitors. You see, I'm inclined to be just a teeny-weeny bit choosy in particular." Billy followed her up to the second floor. "Here's your room," she said. "I do hope you like it." "Thank you," Billy replied. The bed was made, and the bedclothes had been neatly turned back on one side, all ready for someone to get in. "I'll leave you to unpack your things," she said. "Then you can come downstairs and sign the guest book." She gave him a little wave of the hand and went quickly out of the room and closed the door. The landlady was a bit odd, but that didn't bother Billy. After all, she was harmless, and she was obviously a kind and generous soul. After unpacking his suitcase and washing his hands, he decided to go downstairs. In the living room, the fire was still burning in the hearth, and the little dog was still sleeping in front of it. The guest book was lying open on the piano, so Billy picked up the pen and wrote down his name and address. There were two other entries above him on the page. One was a Christopher Mulholland from Cardiff. The other was Gregory Temple from Pittsburgh. That's funny, he muttered to himself. Those names, they ring a bell. Where have I heard them before? Christopher Mulholland and Gregory Temple. Such charming boys, said a voice behind him. He turned around to see the landlady coming into the room with a tea tray in her hands. I'm sure I've read those names before in the newspaper, Billy said. They weren't famous, were they? Famous? The landlady said as she put the tray down and sat on the sofa. Oh, golly, no. I don't think they were famous. They were just young and handsome, my dear. Exactly like you. Why don't you come on over here and sit down beside me on the sofa and have a nice cup of tea before you go to bed? I'm almost positive it was in the newspapers I saw those names, Billy murmured. I'll think of it in a second. I'm sure I will. Come over here now and sit next to me and warm yourself in front of this lovely fire. Come on. Your tea's all ready for you. The landlady patted the empty place beside her on the sofa, and she sat there smiling at Billy. He sat down on the edge of the sofa, and she placed his teacup on the table in front of him. Now, there we are, she said. How nice and cozy this is, isn't it? Billy started sipping his tea. She did the same. For a while, neither of them spoke, but Billy could feel her eyes watching him. Mr. Mulholland was a great one for his tea, she said at length. Never in my life have I seen anyone drink as much tea as dear, sweet Mr. Mulholland. When did he leave? Billy asked. Leave? She said. But my dear boy, he never left. He's still here. Mr. Temple is also here. They're all on the third floor. Both of them together. Billy set down his cup slowly on the table and stared at his landlady. She smiled back at him and patted his knee. How old are you, my dear? She asked. 17, he replied. 17? She cried. Oh my. Well, it's the perfect age. Mr. Mulholland was also 17, but he was a bit shorter than you are, and Mr. Temple was a little older. He was actually 28, and yet I never would have guessed if he hadn't told me. There wasn't a blemish on his body. His skin was just like a baby's. Billy picked up his cup of tea and took another sip. He started at the parrot in the cage. He stared at the parrot in the cage and noticed that it wasn't moving at all. "Is that parrot stuffed?" he asked. "You know something? It had me completely fooled. I could have sworn it was alive. Who did it?" "Well, I did it myself," said the landlady. "And have you seen my little Basil as well?" Billy looked at the dog curled up in front of the fireplace, and suddenly he realized that the whole time it had been just as silent and motionless as the parrot. He reached out and touched the dog. It was hard and cold. "Wow," he said. "That must be very difficult." "Well, no, not at all," she said. "I stuff all my pets when they pass away. Will you have another cup of tea, my dear?" "No, thank you," Billy said. He didn't like the tea. It had a bit of a strange taste. Something like bitter almonds. The room was beginning to feel very hot, and Billy was having trouble catching his breath. "I'm glad you signed the guest book," said the landlady, "because I'm very forgetful. Later on, if I forget what you were called, I can come down here and look it up. I still do that almost every day with Mr. Mulholland and Mr. Temple," Billy said. "Haven't there been any other guests here except them in the last 2 years?" "No, my dear," the landlady said with a grin. "Only you." Good evening, listeners. That does it for our 5 Nights of Fright. I hope you've enjoyed yourself this past week. In another week of mun, fried, all the days seem to sound the same, look the same, feel the same. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do that right this second. Make sure you tell a family friend, tell a loved one, or if you really want to scare the crap out of somebody, make sure you tell somebody you don't like. Those are my favorite listeners. And make sure that this Sunday, all of you out there, celebrate the women that you love. Whether you are a single mom, or if you are a mom doing double duties, or if you're a father doing double duties, I salute you. And to the women in my life, to my mom, and to the love of my life, Happy Mother's Day. That does it for tonight. Sweet dreams, listeners. And make sure you always keep one eye open.